All right, today we're jumping into the life of a figure who is, without a doubt, one of history's most important thinkers, but one you might not even know, Gregory of Nyssa. His story is just this incredible mix of family drama, intense political battles, and, of course, absolutely brilliant ideas that ended up shaping the world for centuries. So let's get into it. So let me ask you this. What if the minds that basically laid the groundwork for Western thought all came from the same family? I mean, it sounds like fiction, right? But for Gregory of Nyssa, that was his actual life. And honestly, it's the key to understanding who he was and what he became. So this is our guy, Gregory. He's living back in the 4th century in a place called Cappadocia, which is in modern-day Turkey. But here's the thing. He wasn't just some genius working in isolation. No, he was part of a family that was a complete and total powerhouse of intellect and faith. And that's really where we have to start. Section 1. A family of thinkers, because you can't really get who Gregory was without first understanding the unbelievable environment he grew up in. See, Gregory, along with his older brother Basilios and a close family friend, eventually became known to history as the Cappadocian Fathers. And trust me, this wasn't just some cute nickname. They were a theological and philosophical force of nature. The work they did went on to define the core beliefs of Christianity for well over 1,000 years. I mean, just look at this lineup. You've got the oldest sister, Macrina, who was this brilliant spiritual force that guided her younger brothers. Then you have Basilius, who would become known as the Great, a total mover and shaker, a real leader. And then there's our guy, Gregory, the younger, more bookish, introspective one. Can you even imagine the dinner table conversations in that house? But Gregory's path wasn't exactly a straight shot to fame. And that brings us to section 2, the reluctant bishop. Turns out, the life that made him a historical giant, he didn't even want it. Gregory's real passion, his first love, wasn't the church, it was rhetoric. He was a professional teacher of public speaking, a respected intellectual out in the secular world, and by all accounts, as he's hitting middle age, a career in the church wasn't even a blip on his radar. So he starts out as this teacher of rhetoric. But then, his big brother Basilios, who's now a major player in the church, needs allies he can trust. So, in 371, he basically twists Gregory's arm to become the bishop of this tiny, forgettable town called Nyssa. And Gregory, well, he reluctantly agrees, making a decision that would completely upend his entire life. And that one decision threw him right into the fire. Which leads us to section 3, a faith under fire. By taking that job, he landed himself smack in the middle of a massive, raging political and theological storm. The storm had a name: Arianism. Now, at the time, this was a hugely popular and politically connected movement in the church. The core idea was that Jesus wasn't co-eternal with God the Father, but was instead created by God. Now, to us, that might sound like splitting hairs, but in the 4th century, this was a battle for the very soul of Christianity. The whole conflict really boiled down to this. On one side, you had the Orthodox view, the one Gregory championed, that Christ is fully divine, existing eternally with God. And on the other side, the Arian view, that Christ was a created being and therefore lesser than God. Gregory's entire life's work became about defending that first idea, not just with blind faith, but with unbelievably sharp philosophical arguments. And believe me, he paid a heavy price for it. His opponents had the emperor on their side, and they cooked up charges against him. In 376, they managed to get him kicked out of his position and forced into exile. It was a total disaster. But then, history just pivots on a dime. The emperor dies in battle in 378, the political winds completely shift, and Gregory is brought back. And just 3 years later, at a massive church council in Constantinople, it's Gregory's theological vision that wins the day, effectively ending the dominance of Arianism. But winning a political fight is one thing. Winning the long-term war of ideas, that's something else entirely. And that brings us to our final section, a legacy in 3 parts. This is where we see Gregory's true genius. So while his political career was full of these dramatic ups and downs, his most lasting impact wasn't made in some council chamber. Nope, it was in his writings. His huge body of work is how he really defeated his opponents and shaped the future. And we can kind of break it all down into 3 main buckets.
First, you've got his dogmatic writings. Think of these as the intellectual heavy artillery, like his massive takedown of a leading Arian thinker named Eunomius. Second, there are his exegetical works, where he dives deep into scripture, like his famous book, The Life of Moses, which reads the story as a kind of roadmap for the spiritual journey. And third, his ascetic writings, which were basically practical guides on how to live a deeply faithful life.
So what did all this writing actually do? Well, for starters, it delivered the intellectual knockout punch to Arianism. It gave the church the philosophical language it needed to define the Trinity, a doctrine that's still central today. And his work on the spiritual journey, it laid the foundation for centuries of mystical theology. His influence is, well, it's just massive. So in the end, the man who never wanted a career in the church, the quiet academic who was pushed onto the public stage by his ambitious brother, he became one of its most profound and lasting voices. His real power, it turned out, wasn't in his official position, but in his pen. And that kind of leads us with one last thing to think about. The arguments Gregory was having took place over 1,600 years ago. And yet, the ideas he thought so hard for still form the bedrock of belief for billions of people today. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many of the ideas that define our world were actually forged in these forgotten battles from centuries and centuries ago?